Okay, so recently we looked at the Old Testament books of the prophets where we saw how they spoke for God. Today we're going to be looking at the Psalms which speak to or about God. Now, I don't know what your experience with the Psalms has been. I know that for many, they're these random songs that we get to quote in our own songs from time to time. And yes, they are songs and prayers, but they're also way more. So let's talk about the Psalms so that we can learn to read and apply them better. Firstly, as I said earlier, they are songs and prayers to or about God. And these songs and prayers are poetic. Now, maybe the first thing you think of when you think about poetry is roses are red, violets are blue, or you think of Shakespeare or some other modern poet. But Hebrew poetry is its own thing. We cannot treat the Psalms the same way we treat Shakespeare, for example. Now, understanding Hebrew poetry is a whole wonderful world on its own, but like all poetry, it is for the mind through the heart. Much of the Psalms are also intended to be sung to very specific musical arrangements lost to us now. Additionally, Hebrew poetry makes rich use of metaphor, but obviously very Hebrew metaphor. The most famous probably being, "The Lord is my shepherd," shepherds being a bit foreign to most of us today. Other Psalms talk about mountains skipping like rams or enemies spewing swords from their lips. These are rich metaphors and not to be taken literally. Some Psalms are written as acrostics, meaning the first letter of each line or verse works through the letters of the alphabet. Psalm 119 being a good example of that. Hebrew poetry also makes use of different types of parallelism, where the same idea is said in two different parallel ways, where no additional meaning is to be discovered. For example, Psalm 19 verse 1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." Both of these lines are simply talking about how the heavenly bodies point towards the glory of God. We would be making a big mistake if we were to try and analyze the difference between skies and heavens using this example. We also need to know that the Psalms had different authors. David wrote almost half of them, that's 73. Moses wrote one, Solomon wrote two, the sons of Asaph wrote several, the sons of Korah wrote several, and there's more authors. And then these Psalms were collected and arranged in 5 books. Now, while we know the historical setting of some of the Psalms, we don't know the setting for most of them. But not only are there different authors for the Psalms, there are also different types of Psalms which in turn help give voice to us in our different situations. For example, over 60 Psalms are laments, giving voice to our pain. Then we have Thanksgiving Psalms, giving voice to our joys. We have Psalms of praise, helping us worship who God is. There are salvation history Psalms, retelling the story of God's great saving works. We have King exalting and King enthronement Psalms, wisdom Psalms, as well as songs about Zion and Jerusalem. We have messianic Psalms pointing towards the coming Messiah fulfilled by Jesus Christ. We even have these strange Psalms known as imprecatory Psalms. For example, Psalm 139, where the psalmists pray for the destruction of their enemies. Once again, helping us realize how the Psalms are not always meant to be taken literally, but are often very real expressions of our hearts, which I think is the main takeaway for us. To allow these words to give voice to our own longings, our own desires, our own pain, and not just to complain to the universe, but to expose our hearts to God, to unburden ourselves to the one who carried our burdens and cares for us. And then, as these Psalms often turn from agony to praise, to allow our own hearts to be transformed in prayer in the presence of the Lord.